Okay, so yay, welcome. So we've got this lovely picture to do. We're doing watercolours because I have found although I first started doing pastels with quite a few of you actually that are on, which is lovely to see you all again. You need so much space. You need a huge table. You need to get them all out. And we've moved house and everything's in storage. And I have to try and feed my addiction in a little place, in a small space. So I've taken to doing watercolours and keeping things little. So this was my big picture that I tried out of this. But I have also done a little version, because I find the watercolour sketchbooks are just brilliant. So I did a teeny one in here to try out. And I didn't photograph it and send it to you, because if you photograph it, it looks really rubbish. But it looks nice from a distance. But what I've done is I've swatched out all of my colours that I own, my watercolours that I own. Well, not all of them, but the tubes. And then we ended up with these as the colours we're going to be using tonight. And I would suggest painting small. I'm doing A4. Let's see if I can get that a bit better for you. Because I thought it would be easier for you to see. I have a set of watercolours here, but I don't think, because my phone has gone into portrait, I don't think you can actually see exactly what I'm using. So I'll try and say when I'm doing my mixes. Now, ideally, you got the message about materials and things, but you don't need a lot. I've got a pencil. We're just very lightly going to draw out the outline. I'm going to try and keep it fairly short tonight, so an hour and a half. I'm probably going to use this one the most, which is just a normal round, or even the smaller one. I probably won't use a flat. I might use a rigger, but probably not. But I did find the teeniest little brush, which you can barely even see, in Primark, for those of you that are in the UK, because look how lovely that would be for doing little grasses. But I didn't tell anybody to get a tiny brush, so don't worry about it. And I do have a big wash brush because I'm working bigger than I intended. And I have a putty rubber. And that's just to, although we're going to draw it in, I'm going to rub out a lot of it so I can just see the minimum lines that I need. But you can be working on anything. These little pads are great for this sort of thing. These gummed pads are brilliant because they're all stuck together, so you don't actually have to tape your paper down. And this is a cold pressed, so it's got a bit of tooth to it, a bit of texture. So my colours that I'm using, cobalt, it's much easier if you stick to very limited palette. So we've got cobalt, lemon yellow, a bit of alizarin, and I've got a raw sienna, but it's a dark brown, which is a bit bizarre. So I've got a burnt sienna as well, which I'm not sure I said to you, but any brown, you don't need a huge amount. And I've got 2 pots of water, a clean one and one for washing my brush off. So I'm just checking any questions before we get started. And off we go. So this was a photograph I took where we've just bought a house in Suffolk, and this was early, not even that early morning. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning a few weeks ago, and I just love the way I want to try and capture this mist and these beautiful golds and this green in the foreground. I just thought it was a really lovely scene and fairly simple because there's very little drawing in it. So I want to keep it simple. Right, so the first thing I'm going to think about is I don't want to have my horizon right in the middle. So I'm going to take it up a little bit. So this is going to be here. And we've got this little cabin. there should be a link in the chat or the description that takes you to the photograph in a Google album. Right, that's that. There's gorgeous red bushes over here and a big red bush here, and you'll notice I am not doing a huge amount of drawing here. I just want to get the basic shapes in. Don't even need to draw that in. But this is quite a good part to draw the eye across the page, and I love the colours. My trees, they come up quite high. And I have pretty much got my horizon right in the middle, always happens. There is a bit of a building behind here. And one of the things with my big painting when I did it, one of the things I found was I didn't, and it's a very common thing to do, I didn't go dark enough. So just put those tree trunks in, got my little tree here. Now I am drawing really quickly, so I'll give you a few minutes to catch up and I can go and check if there's any questions and things as well. Okay, none at the moment, says Ian. Right, so that's all I'm doing. And I'm not even sure you can see that drawing because I've done it very faintly. And I've literally just outlined the... I've just literally outlined the trees, the fence, these two bushes, the diagonal, the little hut, this line and this line at the back, and it's very, very rough because the painting will show you what's what and where. So now you might be able to see it a bit easier, but I need to kind of hide it more for my painting. So I'm going to use my putty rubber just to fade these lines all the way back. So that they don't show through my watercolour when I start painting. I'm just rolling it over the pencil marks and it just comes back to a very, very faint line. You won't be able to see now, but I can. But you can see your own. Right, now I'm going to start with my sky and I'm going to put some of my tube colours out. So I've got my cobalt. You can, of course, you can use pans. Sometimes they can take a bit longer to get active. I need a fair bit of my yellow. And I've used a lemon yellow because it's a Windsor lemon. Because if you use a cadmium lemon, they tend to be opaque, and I don't particularly like them opaque. Not that it really matters. Oh, my alizarin's dried out. That's all right, I can use it out of the pan. So I've got a burnt sienna here. And I'm having a little bit of raw sienna there. But as I say, it's quite a dark one. So I'm going to start with I'm going to start with my big wash brush with just cobalt, and I'm not going to wet my paper first. I'm going to start with just cobalt, but I am going to put a tiny, tiny little bit of burnt sienna in it just to make it a little bit greyer, teeny weeny. Just naturalises it a little bit, and you want lots of colour. And then you want to move fast, so I'm going to sweep across. I'm going to leave some space for my clouds. And coming down behind, but I'm going to let's lift out my clouds with a brush. Dry brush, lift it out. Bit of water on it to get more off. Some of these, soften that. So I'm drying my brush off in between, and I'm just pulling out some of that cobalt. Then I'm going back into my mix, and I'm going to come right the way down, and I'm going to go over my trees. I'm going to go around my little hut, and then I'm going to put in a little bit of that brown and a little bit of my alizarin to give me this purpley colour, a little bit more. There we are. And I've got to work quickly because otherwise it's going to dry, and I'm going to get cauliflowers. A little bit darker here. Some darker up under that cloud. And I'm going to leave that to dry. I'm just going to maybe soften this edge just a little bit. That's it. Bring that down a tad, just soften it. There we are. I'm going to allow that to come down a little. I want more water because I want this bit to be wet. And I'm going to leave the white in the middle, but I'm going to take some of this blue up here. I'm going to rinse my brush off, dry it, and then I'm going to pick up this bead here. So this is going to dry much lighter than it looks even now. Right, I'm going to let that dry for a little while. And just soften this edge as well. There we are. I'm going to use my brush just to pull out, it's clean. Dry it off. I've got a towel under my thing. Just to make this a little lighter, pull some of this water out. Pick up any water you've got around the edges of your picture, and I'm just going to check for questions. And don't worry, it's not going to look like mine. In fact, yours will probably look much better, but I'm just going to check for questions. No, none at the moment. You don't want to be fiddling with your watercolour too much, because you will get, I mean, these runbacks are quite nice in clouds and things, but if you keep working into wet paint while it's drying, you will get a lot of them. So you should be sort of not fiddling around now. And I'm going to start on this green down here. I don't mind too much if this is still drying and it drifts into that. That's absolutely fine, because this is going to have some softer edges on it. So my yellow, I'm going to mix up some of my yellow and some of my blue to give me this really, really vivid green. Really vivid green. And I am literally going to just put that across this area here. Even adding in a little bit more yellow. I'm adding a little bit more yellow, a little bit more blue to give it a bit of variation. That lime green's incredible, isn't it? Right, wash my brush off, and in this, along this edge, we've got a really dark line here, and then we've got some of this beautiful brown and orange colour. So I've got a bit of raw sienna and a bit of yellow. So I'm going to have some of that. In fact, I'm going to use the side of my brush, so I'm going to make sure it's not too wet. I just want a bit of this colour along the edge. And I want some dark in there, so I'm not washing my brush, I'm just going to pick up a little bit of alizarin and my blue, and I should get quite a nice rich dark brown. I'm just going to drop in while it's still wet along the bottom here. In fact, that's not dark enough. I want more. More blue, more burnt sienna. I want it to be really quite dark. Actually, it doesn't matter if it's a little bit more blue. You kind of have to not worry too much about the outcome with watercolour. Okay. Now, this is almost completely dry, so I'm going to go back with my grey and try and paint in this horizon line. So I want a fairly soft grey. I've got a little bit of paper here to try my colours out on. So that looks all right to me. And I'm going to put it in, and then I'm going to lift some out. And it gets a little darker as it comes along here. So some of the colours I've mixed before, a bit more of the alizarin and the burnt sienna. And that also, it's even darker along here. So a bit more brown, a bit more blue, to quite a dark grey, but because I'm only using 3 colours, it shouldn't look too odd. And I'm going to come back and soften these. I've got this building roof here. I'll come back and soften some of these edges. This comes all the way along. Rinse my brush off a little bit and dry it off, so I've got a tiny little bit of this grey to come in here. So I can try and capture, try and make it look a bit misty. So I'm washing my brush off, drying my brush off, and then I'm going to pull this out again while it's still wet, so it will carry on running. So we're beginning to get that misty effect. Okay, I'm okay with that because I can paint this in darker. I can paint my little house in darker as we go. So I'm looking at these trees, and when I did the big picture, I realised after I'd finished it a few days later, I hadn't gone dark enough. So I'd ended up with it all fairly mid-tone, and I had to go back and drop in these darks. And even now, I think they could be a lot darker. So that's our goal, is to try and make sure our trees are dark enough. So I'm going to go down a brush size to a smaller round. I'm working with the same colours that I've mixed here, but I've got a little bit more brown in this one. In fact, I want it to be a bit more grey, so let's add a little bit more blue. And I'm going to add a little bit more alizarin as well. That's it. So, and I've got a dry brush, so it's not too wet. And I'm going to try to get this effect of the bushes from here. Right, and as it goes, it gets very dark down here. As it goes up here, you get a lot more of this gold in. So I'm just dipping into my raw sienna. And I also have some of that colour up here. And in fact, it's even brighter, so I'm going to add in a little bit of the yellow to that as well. Because if I get those colours in, I think I can paint around them a bit more. This is quite red, so a little bit of my alizarin, but I'm going to keep it dry. Try and keep it dry. They're nearer, so they're bigger. Okay, back to my grey. A little bit more blue. You see, it should be fairly easy to manipulate your colours if you're only using 4. There we are. So that is the colour right down here that runs along the top of my fence. It's very dense. And there is actually the roof of a building here. Right, and see here, this is very dark, this tree here. So I'll drop in some more. I'm trying to work while it's still a bit wet. It's very dark behind there. But I don't want it all the same. Easier said than done. But I'm drying off my brush, and I'm just going to pull out some of the colour behind here because it's a bit misty here, the back. So rinse my brush off, dry it off, and then try and lift out some of this. That's better. Now, we're carrying on filling this in. You can see how dark this is. There's some green in there as well. So I'm going to pull a little bit of my blue and my yellow with a tiny bit of alizarin in, so I've got a very dark green. I don't want it all over because it is winter, this scene. Okay. Wash my brush off, back into my grey. This is quite a dry brush again, so I'm going to put in my, just want to touch it so that I get my tree.
Rosemary said, what colours are you using for the misty visual?
I've only got a few colours on my palette, so I'm using, for this I used blue burnt sienna, or you can use blue and alizarin, and then you need to put a little bit of maybe yellow in it just to grey it out. Because you see, you could use Payne's grey, but you can actually make Payne's grey with these colours. So you just sort of have to mix these. If you stick to like 4 colours, you should be able to change them backwards and forwards fairly easily. So I'm going in darker again over here. Gone back into my nice sludgy brown. I'm going to put some darker bits in. I mean, you can see from my palette, all of these are mixed from just these 3 colours, and I did use it. I've got a little bit of alizarin on here, which I've used to sort of tone down my green. So if you go too pink, you add in a bit more blue and then a tiny touch of brown, and you should find you get some nice greys. So I've got a browny grey there, so I'm going to add a little bit more blue to it. That's quite a nice bluey grey colour, but it's darker, so that's quite nice for my trees that are in the foreground. I need to leave, mustn't paint over all of it, that's easy to do. Paint too much. This doesn't have any light coming through it down here. And this is very dark along here. You just want variation, variation of colour, variation of tone. These bushes here have got a really dark colour in them, but I want to put in the red and orange first. So I'm going to try a bit of my burnt sienna, raw sienna, with a bit of burnt sienna and yellow, and see how that looks if I bring it down here. We tend to think that watercolour should be watery, but it doesn't actually always have to be. I want dark again in this part here, so I'm going into some of my sludgy mixes. I'll let that run in. And there's some nice red leaves there. They're quite bright. I'm also a great believer in using gouache if you do it and you think, oh, I'm not sure about that. Now this is quite a good colour for these, but first of all I need to get the reflections in. Right, I can now go back and paint my little hut in a bit more, I think. Actually, no, I'm going to do that last. So I'm going to start doing this area around here. Can you see how pale this has dried? There's practically nothing there. I can go back and finish my trees later. You do have to keep your, particularly if you want to get these sort of marks, this dry brushing, you do have to keep your brush very dry. And obviously the paper you're working on will make a big difference. If it hasn't got a lot of texture, you won't be able to brush it over the surface like this. So I've got this darker one that comes along here. So I'm just going to paint that in a little bit more. Accentuate it. Now, to do my water, I've got this area that can go on afterwards, but to do these lovely reflections, I want my paper to be wet. So I'm going to wet all this area again and then try to drop in some more darker blue down here and then these reflections up here. So the first thing I want to do is mix up the colours that I want. So at the moment I've got really quite a messy palette, so I'm going to clean it. I can always mix these colours again, but I want my reflections to be a bit clean. And then I'm going to mix, because I want to drop colours in, I'm going to mix up the colours that I want. So this very soft grey violet, I'm going to start with alizarin and add in a bit of my cobalt. So that gives me a real purple. I want that a little bit greyer. So if I add the teeniest bit of yellow to that, greys it out just a fraction. Right, so I've got that. I haven't got a lot of it, but I've mixed up a little bit of that. I'm going to mix up these colours, which are sort of that and a darker version. So again, I'm gonna start with my blue this time and add my alizarin in. That gives me a really dark one. Again, I'm going to add in my tiny bit of yellow. And that's going to give me quite a nice purpley grey for there. And that is actually all just variations of the same colour until I get over here where I've got my orange and I've still got some of that left. So, are we ready to have a go at that? Right, so I'm going to wet. And I can paint over this. Ooh, I can paint my little boathouse on afterwards. So what I want to do at the moment is just wet this whole area. Quite happy for this all to run in. I haven't yet put my fence in, so I need to leave that. But this is all fine for it to be running. Right, so I want that nice and wet. Should be able to see the sheen on the paper. And it will make a difference if you're using good quality watercolour paper because it holds a lot of water. Now, I'm going to start with these. I'm going to leave a space for my yellow. That's not quite mixed properly. Right, can you see how much this is running? And it's probably still a bit too purpley. So into here, I'm going to add a little bit of yellow. And actually what you want to do here is pull it down. And my softer mauve up there. And it will dry lighter, don't forget. So of course this is diluting as you go along. I'm going to wait for this to dry a little bit more and go again. But before I do that, I'm going to put in some fresh blue down in this corner. Doesn't have to look exactly the same, don't forget. It really doesn't. I just want a bit of variation. Now I've got to dry my brush off and pick up this wet bead because that will run back otherwise. Now I'm going back into my grey, my darker grey. The side of my brush I'm using. I've got some quite strong colour on here. I've got some yellow there. And across here. Okay. I'm now going to, because this is dry, should be dry, your top. So I'm now going to try and paint in my fence, which is really light. So I've got a bit of my yellow and a tiny bit of my fence. Sorry, tiny bit of my burnt sienna. And quite a bit of this is going to be painted over. So I don't want it all that colour. Some of it can be left the colour that it already is, to be fair. I'm mixing that with a bit of my green that I had from earlier. So a bit of blue, a bit of yellow, to get that lovely coppery kind of, I suppose it's like this, not seaweed, but the plants that grow along the side of the river.
What is your favourite aspect of watercolour?
Oh, goodness. I do like the softness of it, but actually what I quite enjoy now is that how portable it is, because you can use it anywhere. And it's much more forgiving than I kind of thought it was, because you can actually use gouache to go over anything that you're not happy with. And I quite like that. So I'm going to take a bit of tissue and dab this out a little bit, just to give it a bit of variation. There we are. I think also watercolour, it can be used in so many different ways. You can use it like acrylics if you want to, and have things that are really bright and vivid and dense. It doesn't always have to be used in the way we perceive, and some people do incredibly in-depth paintings. I'm using it again dry, look, to get this. Using, that's not dry enough on that paper. Layering. No, that's not working. It's not dry enough. If you look at somebody like, what's his name? Poxon, David Poxon. He does incredible paintings and he'll do like 27 different layers. He does all the old metal and doors and things like that. And his work's super. So this is much darker up here. So I need to put some more grey in there. But I love that I can take my watercolours. I'm going back in here with some darker colours. I can take my watercolours on an aeroplane and sit and paint, you know, when I'm travelling, and I loved being able to do that. And depending on what sort of paper you have, you may find your paper's dried, it might not have done. I think Mary might be on, I think she's in Florida or somewhere, and I think yours will have definitely dried, Mary. It's kind of taking shape, isn't it? So can you see, if you look at the values of this, how much darker and denser it is than anything I've got in here? So I need to go in and build out some more. So I'm not changing my colours. I need a bit more of my cobalt. Working with the same colours, so there should be a harmony in the painting when you've finished if you stick with the same colours. And I'm going with my middle-sized brush. And I want to make these denser so that this looks more sort of ethereal or whatever it is you want to call it. So my blue, and I'm mixing still in where I'd mixed before, because having some of those other colours in your paint is what links it all together. I've got some alizarin, I've got some blue, and I've got some burnt sienna. So that makes that really revolting colour. But if I add a little bit more blue in, and keep checking, that's too blue. So to tone that down, I need a little bit more brown. That's looking more like it. So that's actually looking a bit like Payne's Grey. And I need to just maybe fill out some of these areas. And I've got it thick again. These bushes had some really dark bits underneath. I don't want to go overboard and do too much. She says, I'm trying to get them to look a bit more like actual trees. That's very dark, that one at the back. There's a little really dark one here. And this is very dark along the top of the fence. And it does create quite a nice eye. It draws your eye along here. It's looking a bit better. And my roof. Okay, I think that's looking a bit better now. I want some dark along here, but there is a reflection under there as well. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is actually just with a wet brush go along that line, dry it out a little bit and try and soften that edge before I do anything else. That's it. I think that looks a bit better. Now, I'm going to do, actually I want this to come a bit down a bit further, so I'm probably going to put another wash over here and then I can go in again a bit darker. I don't want it to run as much as it has this time, so I'm just going to come across here. So I've wetted that again, and I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait a little while for that to dry. But in the meantime, I'm going to do a little bit more of this. I want a darker green, and I'm using a bigger brush that I have less control over. And I've got my blue and my yellow, which gives me quite a vivid green and not a very realistic one. So I'm going to put a tiny little bit of burnt sienna in to give me more of a sludgy green. And then we're going to just try with this brush that I don't really have a lot of control over. I want it drier. To put some grassy marks in. I don't want it all covered, and I don't want it to look too controlled. Right, so how wet is this? Oh, that's not too bad. Let me see how much it runs. Back to my other brush. Now this paint that I'm picking up is the paint I had earlier, so it's fairly dry still. Probably not got enough pigment in it, so back to mixing. That's a bit too blue. So add a little bit of brown to that. That's a bit better. And that actually comes up, that's quite dark over here. It comes all the way down to my grasses. And in here it's very dark. I will just let it run and see what happens, I think. Again, this is much darker. So my blue, my brown, blue, bit of yellow. That's better. Look at that, that's really looking. The right kind of dark. For here anyway. I'm just going to soften that up. Gone too far there. So I am now looking at this. So I want my grasses down here. So there's several ways of doing that. Oh, I've got this really stinky little brush. It's just ridiculous, really. Look at this. I think it's a bit cheaty, really, though. I might play with that later. But along here, you see these, what I'm kind of thinking about doing is using something that's fairly sharp at the end of my pencil without the lead in to pull some colour up. So I am going to go in with some alizarin, and I want I want a lot of pigment in it, but I want it to be quite wet because I want it to run. I'm putting some burnt sienna in it and some blue. And let's see if I can show you what I think about what I'm trying to do here. So this should be wet, quite wet. So it should have, that's it, I want it really wet. And then I'm going to use my pencil to draw up some grasses. It should be shorter at this end than this end, but... And then I'm going to go along the bottom and just pick out some of this with a dry brush, lift some out so that it doesn't look all too one colour. I want to drop some dark in there as well, so I'm putting some really dark blue into that to add into some of these areas. It's quite dark along that bit of... I keep talking and then forgetting what I'm saying because I keep getting distracted. So I don't say anything and then you run out of a sentence. That's looking a bit better. I mean, that is the whole thing with this, is it's playing and experimenting and seeing what happens. But I quite like the effect of that. And each time, so this is the third time I've done it, and each time I like something different that I've done, and they never turn out the same. So you just have to keep playing. I might just dab out a little bit of this. That's it, just to give it some variation. Yeah, that was cool. I'm going to paint in my little hut. So I want the equivalent of a Payne's Grey. If you've got Payne's Grey, you can use it instead of mixing it. But I'm mixing my alizarin with my blue and a little bit of raw sienna. So I've got this sort of dark. And I've got a small brush and I want this little hut It's the like the focal point is the darkest part in this area. So I'm just painting its roof. And then it does have, it's paler, so I'm going to rinse my brush off a little bit, but I need to dry it. It does have its reflection just a little bit below. Across there, and then there's a little bit down here as well. Just blend that with a bit of water. Okay, I'm going to use the same colour to do this. It's like the, not causeway, but it's the riverbank. And it's quite dark. And you can just make out the little posts. Same colour, a little bit more blue in it. And I'm going to do some of these, got a couple of tree trunks, got some firm up my little roof as well. And I want to put in this fence. So this fence actually, it's difficult to see where I've put it now. So it kind of comes around here, but it's got its reflection. So I need my line here to be halfway between this goldy colour. It comes around the corner. It comes down here. And then I'm going to put in some posts, I guess they are. Very dark behind there, isn't it? That's why you've got this dark reflection down here. So I'm going to put a little bit more of that in. Okay. It's got some dark areas. It's a bit grayer. The fence kind of disappears in some areas. And I'm going to dab that out a little bit. There we are. It's a bit grayer here. And a few more marks here, I think. A bit more. Try and match my above and below. Right, how are we looking? Not too bad. It's not great, it's not a masterpiece, but it's fun, isn't it? Now, finish this off Again, dry brush, a bit more of my that nice dark brown. Let's see if I can get this texture. It's better. There we are, very dry. Some areas it's much darker. And I think just want to do something there. Do the same colour. I think we're nearly done. Wow, do I think it's dark enough? Let's have a look. Yeah, so I can see here, and I don't know if this paper will do it because it's not a particularly good quality paper, but you can see I haven't left the light under here. So let's see if I can lift it out. Not sure I can. So what I do is I just get a clean brush. I want to lift this back a bit. So a clean brush, wet your paper, well that has worked actually. Oh, you're lucky, aren't you? And in here I can do the same. So it looks like there's a bit of light coming through. Oh, that's better. See, it is a bit more forgiving than we kind of think it is. And then what I want to do is paint those in, but they needs to be drier. I'm going to put a little bit, can you see this is a little bit darker along here, so I'm going to go back in with one of my sort of purpley grey. That might be too pink. Yeah, just a tad too pink. Let's see, what's this colour? That's okay, I think. It's a bit darker, it just runs kind of across here, doesn't it? And a little bit into the bushes. And got these little birds. They're cute, aren't they? Is this dry enough for me to be able to put my tree trunks on? Maybe. Try putting in some of those little birdies, and we're going to be finishing in just a few minutes. Might have made a mistake to put the birds in, but they're cute, aren't they? probably, she says. Make that darker. Yeah, they've spread a bit, so I should probably have waited and put those in a bit later. But I think I'm going to call that done. So I really appreciate you joining me. Leave some questions if you have any. If you go, there should be a link. It's definitely in my bio, but over on Skool, I've got a free community, and I don't exactly know how it all works yet, but I know we can actually have coffee together and chat like you can on Zoom, and I can do live things in there, but you can ask questions. It's going to be a real community, I think, so I'm quite excited about it. So it's free. Come over. We're going to chat about all things arty, but if you've got more questions or queries, I'd love to see your work, so please come over there and share it with me, because there's no facility for that on YouTube. And I hope you enjoyed it despite all the
Emily said wow.
Wow, I got a wow. Gosh, thank you so much. One last thing I'm going to suggest is when you're doing water, if you've got a sharp instrument, you can also do it with white. Is you can actually, it's quite nice to put some lines across to show it's water. Not too many. Oh, thanks, Amanda. Yeah, you could use a bit of white paint to do that as well. But first challenge done. Yes, well, it's about a bit of chill time, so I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will be here again next week if you fancy catching up again. Cheers.